travelers.
Yeah, that was an interesting bit of research that was in the New York Times, because we think so much about China, but a lot of this came from Europe. You're right about that. And the good news is, as doctors and public health officials will tell you, is there's still time for these parts of the country who haven't been hit if they adhere to social distancing and all these things that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx told us yesterday are working and will bring down the death toll in this country. But you need the president to lead from the top on that and say, hey, this is working. We're going to continue this for a while. I know it's painful, but in the long run, it will be better than the alternative. Jonathan, I'd ask you what kind of pressure the president is feeling about opening the economy. We know that's his instinct. He said that he wanted to have it open by Easter, backed off of that. Who around him is saying, hey, Mr. President, this jobs number today is going to be bad. It's time to get this economy cranked up again? Because I know he feels that pressure, and he probably feels it in his own gut.
No question. In fact, I think it's been almost underreported how close he was to reopening the economy at that Easter target date. He's played it down since. He's claimed it was more an aspirational date, but he had really fallen for the symbolism of an American economic rebirth on Easter Sunday, which is this, of course, this coming Sunday, and wanted to pull the trigger on it until he was talked out of it after being shown in a dramatic Oval Office meeting by Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx as they spread maps across the Resolute desk, saying just how bad the death toll could be if and that's even with the social distancing guidelines in place for most of the country. So this is something that's still with a significant debate within the West Wing. The president is pushing for a reopening of the economy, in part because, connected to what we talked a few minutes ago, his efforts to spin this, his efforts to deflect blame have not worked. The Trump playbook of shifting, of denying and deflecting and blaming others has not played out, and it's being reflected in the polls. So there's a push here to change things. Obviously, they have one eye towards November, towards re-election, and if the economy continues to falter, and they're watching these numbers carefully, there is going to be renewed push from the president to try to push forward. And we're already, as I will say as a final point, seeing some chatter in the conservative media that May 1st should be the day when most of the nation goes back to work, even though a lot of the health experts have suggested that is still far too soon.
Well, of course, where you want to get your information is from the pro-Trump media. Because they've been so deadly accurate from the beginning of this process. So why listen to medical advisors? Please get your health advice from the pro-Trump media, and watch another 200,000 Americans die. No, we don't listen to the pro-Trump media because they listen to his lies. They recirculate his lies. And the consequences are tragic. Mika, I was just checking the numbers on the European travel. So the two studies that have been made by Mount Sinai and the NYU School of Medicine, and they had remarkably similar conclusions that when the coronavirus started circulating around in February, most of the genomes point back to Europe and not China. And this is why that's important for future leaders to understand the importance in pandemics or epidemics of moving quickly. At the end of January, as I said, Deputy National Security Advisor Pottinger asked that all European travel be closed down. End of January. Donald Trump wasted a month, actually up to 5-6 weeks, and actually, because he was worried about the stock market, kept open travel from Italy, travel from Europe until March the 11th. That's when the European ban finally came into play. So during all that time, we've been asking all along, why was New York disproportionately hit? Again, we thought San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, which had more commercial ties with China, let's say, than the East Coast, you think, because of travel. But it was actually Europe that hit hardest, according to these two new studies that are out. And it hit hardest when it started circulating in mid-February, in large part, probably because, once again, the advice of somebody on inside the White House in January was ignored.
So, Jonathan Lemire has been writing about the blame game and how this president is constantly, every day, trying to shift the blame on the WHO or this or that or the liberal media. But there's some basic problems this time in terms of this scandal versus all other Trump scandals. Number one, if your child or your spouse or your parent is ill, doctors become your lifeline for information. Nobody else matters. You want so much for that person to get better. And this scandal, this botched prep for this pandemic, this one has called for all Americans' participation. Everybody's life has been uprooted. Children are not in school. People can't leave their homes. It is called for our participation. And in some respect, some of the numbers are going down because of what Americans have done for themselves. And so, unlike any other Trump scandal, because everybody is so invested in this and everybody is so involved, making the moves to stop the spread, people are compelled to read about it. People are compelled to talk to their doctors. People are compelled to understand what happened here. And when they look at the facts are not good for the way this White House did not prepare, and really, truly just Trump and maybe his son-in-law and a few other Trump inner circle members. There were people desperately trying to tell this president that this was coming, and it is clear when you look at the facts and when you look at what Americans are doing to save themselves. Why didn't they start earlier? That's what they're going to ask. That's the information that's never, ever going to be branded away by this president. Casey Hunt.
Well, let me just say, first of all, this isn't just it's not a Trump scandal. It's a national.
It's an international scandal.
It is a national tragedy. This is a national tragedy. And again, we have to be more careful in our language and stop talking about the White House and blaming the entire White House. Because again, you had last year, HHS Secretary Azar saying what kept him up at night was the fear of a pandemic,
trying to get through to Trump.
Pandemic. You had the CDC on December 31st of last year starting to assemble information about this growing crisis coming out of China. You had Azar, the HHS secretary, on January the 3rd, getting the information about it. You had actually the intel agencies starting to warn the president in his daily presidential briefings in early January about the coming crisis. And you could go through the month of January and look, on the 18th of January, you had the HHS secretary finally be allowed to talk to the president about the coming pandemic. And the president, actually, who didn't like Azar, and so Azar had trouble getting through to him, instead of listening about the possibility of this coming pandemic, he instead was upset with Azar and wanted to know when flavored vaping materials would be available again in the public. And then you go beyond that, about a week later, that's when we got the really harsh warning, about 10 days later, really harsh warning from Navarro talking about how 500,000 Americans could die and that the White House was ill-prepared and ill-suited for this crisis and they better get moving. But the president was still saying, nothing to see here. Only one person, only 11 people. Even late into February, only 15 people with this disease. It'll all magically go away in April.
And then of late, the president, having a ship captain removed for trying to save his sailors. There are 200 sailors with coronavirus on the USS Roosevelt right now, and he has the person removed. He erupts when reporters ask him about this timeline. It's hard to watch because it's like the emperor's clothes just fall off every day during his briefings.
The ship captain, of course, again, Donald Trump was able to shift blame, and so the Assistant Secretary of Navy was relieved, resigned.
It's a mess.
Which should have been. So there are all of these issues circulating around, Casey Hunt. Again, so many of them, if the president would just put his head down and do his job and stop trying to turn medical press briefings into political rallies, stop worrying about his ratings and start worrying about how many Americans are dying every day, then this would all be taken care of during the election.